Today's guest is Dan Orton. Dan and I have known each other over many years through various guises. He was once a chef in the City of London, through to becoming a digital marketing expert, working for various entrepreneurs over the years before becoming VP of Global Sales at Velez. Today we talk about how family, life, and work all melt together, ultimately to show that work-life balance can work, and traveling around the world seeing clients means that coming home makes it all that more special. Here's Dan Orton. So, Daniel Brett Orton. Well, we don't go with the Brett.
Please don't.
You've got probably one of the most interesting backgrounds in anybody at this company. And just before we get started on that, obviously these podcasts very much focused around what's going on externally, nothing that's internal. But because you and I have I want to say previous relationship, but history prior to Velez, it kind of works as an external. So rewind as far back as memory will serve. Where did the career start out?
Well, that's an interesting one. My career actually started out initially as a chef. A lot of people know that, but worked in high-end restaurants for a good chunk of my career. Learnt the trade very fast. Learnt how to multitask, which is really important, particularly being in the role I'm in today. Did that for many years, became head chef of my own brigade at a very early age. Then when I realised that, working 80 hours a week in a very hot and stressful environment was a bit too much for me, I decided to look out for something else. At the time I was particularly scared because I didn't really know anything else. Although I'd done a bit of programming at college at a younger age, I just did not have the attention span or the patience for that particular trade.
So without dating you too much, what were you programming
in? Cabal and Pascal. Learnt a little bit around the Oracle stuff. But yeah, I just didn't have the patience for it. It was just too much. So at the time I switched into hospitality, enjoyed that, learnt all aspects of that, and then got into it. But interesting times. I do have a passion for food and wine, particularly the wine nowadays, and of course everyone likes to eat. But I seeked different career paths. I looked at potentially going and doing something at university. And took my time really. Then an opportunity came up within an organisation where digital marketing was the thing, web design, development, search engine optimization, and really sort of getting businesses in front of prospective buyers. And that started out as a sales role, contacting business owners, business leaders, just to kind of explore what their current strategy was, and really discuss that and see how we could help at the time.
So any transferable skills from being a mini Gordon Ramsay into selling?
Well, definitely not the sort of the shouting and the screaming that you might see Gordon do on TV, although that is actually apparent in a lot of the kitchens, particularly the French trained ones. No, I mean, the only thing that I've really took forward is organisational skills. Looking for something that's a potential problem or a challenge in advance, and trying to be proactive around that, and certainly multitasking, being able to juggle multiple balls and manage that is definitely something I've taken forward.
Quite literally spinning plates then?
Yeah, you could say that. A few have dropped, of course, and smashed on the floor over time, but that's how you learn, right?
So when you were in this marketing company, you were a salesman, so was that what we know now as SDR? Was you an AE, an AM? Did you walk in as sales director and immediately on a six-figure salary?
No, I wish. No, I actually started out as a telemarketer. We had a list of information to contact business owners, and we had pretty hard targets then. The number of decision makers, conversions, and the idea was to book meetings for the field sales based team to get them in front of prospects.
So who were the prospects then? Because a digital marketing agency can work with everyone and anyone, and again your background was very specific, so how did you translate that into other areas?
Predominantly the market we were targeting was small and medium-sized companies, which then later led on to sort of enterprise type companies. What I learned from that in those early days was that there was a huge difference between a small business and an enterprise, and those conversations that you would have would be very different around business. So the sort of questions you asked would be different. A small business doesn't have a budget, an enterprise does. Figuring out how they spend their budget, whether they've done it right, wrong, and just advising. So predominantly I would say it was more of a consultative process, and it led into other things as well, like business coaching as well.
So how old was you in this marketing, sales, telemarketing role?
Oh, crikey, good question. I was in sort of late 20s, early 30s.
But you were selling then to people in their 40s and 50s who might have been high net worth, might have been CEOs of companies?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, we had to reach the decision makers. We weren't able to speak to management or lower levels, if you like. We need to go straight to the top. And what was a challenge then and still is a challenge today is, identifying their personalities. I like to talk, as you know, but when you're in front of a CEO that has only got 5 minutes and you've only got 5 minutes to get your questions out and get what you need, you have to learn very quickly to adapt to that.
So marketing aside, you were there for how long?
7 years overall. Swiftly moved from the telemarketing position into more of a online and field-based salesperson. Realised that I was pretty good at this, exceeded targets, was very competitive, which you need to be in that sort of role, and swiftly moved up the tree really, and had some good successes.
What's your take on targets? Because we're recording this in February 21, and targets for many companies are not being achieved. Sales has been slashed. What is your take on targets nowadays? Because you've also got a raft of people coming through and coming up through the ranks now who might not believe that targets are the KPI for a business anymore in sales.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, you need KPIs, you need targets. You don't start a race without a finish line. You need to benchmark or have a line really that you need to be able to cross. Yeah, given the current situation, salespeople generally will be struggling to hit and maintain those targets. And speaking to other people in the industry, they've had to adapt and change things quite rapidly in order to bring in revenue. Targets need to be there, KPIs need to be there. You just need to be able to adapt, change, motivate the team to help them succeed, really.
So you smashed targets, you were there for 7 years. What happened then?
So a recruitment agency got in contact with me, and they said they were just checking in on me, had me on file. At the time, I didn't recollect actually registering with this, and at the time I wasn't particularly looking, but they said they'd got a client that was an IT company that didn't have a sales process, didn't have a marketing strategy. The business had been acquired recently, and they were looking for sort of people to come in and really sort of work with the leadership team to help change things and drives marketing and sales. So I was interested, so I went for the interview and sort of tried to figure out what was going on. There was a new sales director that joined from another competitor who had fresh and exciting ideas. So yeah, I joined the business and very quickly understood that they had one salesperson who seemed quite comfortable, no real KPIs, no targets. The website was half developed. They had no SEO strategy. They didn't know what video was. It was very much a start from scratch role, which was exciting.
So this company had been around for a few years, had just done a management buyout?
Yeah, originally the organisation was called something else, been around since I think 1988, something like that. It was bought out by a software company, they rebranded, changed their name. Unfortunately I wasn't involved at that stage, and I wish I was, because certainly I would have put forward some better ideas. So yeah, things were going really good.
A company that was effectively stagnant since '88, had no real sales or marketing process. You've come in. How do you take a company that's been around, some 20 years, that hasn't really evolved, and how do you take that forward?
Well, a lot of people that were in the business for many, many years only kind of knew one way. And actually, when they started out, there was not a lot, if any, competition. What I believe is that what they didn't see was that other organisations, other competitors were doing things a lot better, a lot smarter. They were moving with the times, and my role there was to help drive that forward with the leadership team and get them to understand that we've got to be competing with these guys going forward. So a lot of what I'd learnt previously I brought into the business. Some things got through and some things didn't, and budget was very much had a part to play on that. But ultimately, I put my case forward.
Do you feel like your time there was successful in terms of what you were trying to achieve with the sales and marketing output?
To start with, yes. Then things changed again. The business was bought out, kind of like an MBO. But half the business was software, half the business was infrastructure support. What actually happened was the software stayed with the original owners, and then the new ownership took over the infrastructure side, downsized significantly in terms of personnel, and also budgets then downsized, which became a bit of a problem in the sense of more and more competition was coming on the scene. Different organisations were doing things much smarter and better, like I said previously, and then I felt a little bit restricted.
It's one thing for a company to go through succession planning, right, where there's a time frame. Oftentimes when there is a new CEO coming into place, it's usually through something like CEO succession planning. So you're given, hey, this new guy's going to take over in 6 to 12 months, where it sounds like you almost had tomorrow we have a new CEO or a new managing director, and quite possibly the same day a new direction for the business. How did you manage that, being an existing person in a senior position yourself at the time?
Well, first of all, I sort of went back over the original strategy that I put forward in the plans, and revisited the things that were declined or shelved for a period of time to then go over those things. I pushed hard, very hard on making sure that we stood out from the crowd. I managed to get and secure investment in sponsorship and through sports like football, the local team, cricket, and other avenues. Then other ideas were being run past me, like the current sales team, which was very small and limited, the recruitment of that area. And then what came was an acquisition of a smaller IT firm, which I was put directly involved with, not from the due diligence side of things, but more of the customer relationship, and sort of figuring out where they were and what they were doing.
Okay, so when you look at that, you've worked in the kitchens where, I mean, I'm guessing you probably didn't know the owner or have a day-to-day relationship with the owner.
Mm.
You then go work for a marketing firm where, if I recall, the MD was a business coach himself and would go out there and parade his thing about how to run a business. Now you're involved in a new ownership in the IT firm that you're working for. You've dealt with a couple of different leadership styles there, clearly. You know, what are the pros and cons of various leadership styles you've seen across these organizations? And are there any common themes that you've been able to pick up?
The common themes have been personalities, for sure. You know, in any working environment, in any career, you know, people are different. People buy from people. So you got to really understand those different personalities. You know, I've worked with highly strung, very direct people for right the way back to my chefing days. So, you know, if you have a CEO where that's the case today, you know, I'm prepared for that. A lot of people aren't. In the digital marketing firm, yes, the business leader there was a business coach and wasn't around a lot of the time, to be fair, but it was mainly left to the operation director to sort of run the show there. You know, I picked up some good training tips along the way from there, but actually the self-teaching, the self-motivation later on is where I believe I've really excelled. So yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, and certainly joining the IT firm, the business leader there, the CEO, was very different from day to day and even hour by hour. Some days you would get a smile, and other days you wouldn't.
And it's safe to say, I think, to give everyone in that position some credit, it's a very stressful job to have, being the person at the top. And certainly from my experience, you have to lean on those around you, bringing good people in the business that you can then not necessarily offload, but share some of the load with. Were you seeing that in that organization? Was the load being shared at all?
Yes and no. A good CEO, you know, or a managing director is a good leader. You know, good leaders, you know, get the respect, earn the respect of the team. You know, you can't achieve anything in life, in business, without a team. One person may think they can do it alone, but they do rely on input, reassurance from, you know, other directors or management, team leaders, or even employees. You know, and yeah, in that organization in particular, whilst I spent a lot of time in the CEO's office and I was asked for guidance, a lot of my input wasn't heard, which was very frustrating.
There's a phrase that I heard many years ago, which sticks to me quite a lot over the years, which is respect comes from admiration or from fear. And I think a lot of the time, and it sounds like it with that particular organization, it was respect was commanded through fear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw a number of directors come into the organization, quite a high number actually. And, you know, first of all, sitting down with them individually, listening to their experiences and what they'd achieved was exciting. But I also believe that in that organization, yeah, you know, their experience probably overpowered a lot of the people, particularly the ownership of that company, and therefore, it just shut down, which was a shame, really.
And I think it was probably at this point that you and I probably first crossed paths, I would imagine, around about this time. So you was a senior sales leader there. I was a managing director of a software company. I'd had that company for the best part of 10 years. And I think you and I probably crossed paths multiple times at marketing events locally.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when people ask me how you and I met. Usually I open with, Sean and I used to be competitors. We used to snarl and grin at each other across a room at a networking event. I recall actually going to one where you came over and wanted to buy me a beer, and I wasn't too keen for you to do that because it sort of showed the power and authority, but I accepted. But yeah, one of the other things I tell people is, we worked together previously, and I wasn't sure initially how that was going to pan out. In fact, I remember the HR manager saying, who's this Sean Price? What do you know? And I said, I'm not sure this is the right move, but in that organization at the time, we really needed, or I needed, somebody to help me get my voice heard. Previously, other people that had come into the business weren't able to do that. And I knew that, from your experience of being in the industry and obviously running businesses previously, now was the time, now was the chance.
So to put context around that, I joined the same organization and identified, I suppose, a lot of the similar problems you'd found there. And certainly the reason I'd come in was I'd exited my business, I'd taken some time out, I'd advised a couple of IT firms locally, and that company in particular were looking for what was advertised effectively as CEO succession planning. It was come in, sort out the organization, take the reins a little bit, and we'll go from there. And, it's safe to say that as my position there as a director, I stayed for 6 months and then left. And I think by and large, that's been the longest term that any director there has been able to successfully stay for, without being pushed out sooner. But that was an interesting point because you and I knew each other from before. Like you say, we snarled, we growled, you eventually accepted a beer. And there was that power dynamic. But then once we were on the same side, and it was that, hey, you have the ear of the CEO, or you have the ability to translate or have that, I don't want to say respect or authority with him because I don't think that was the right word, but had the ability to get certain messages and ideas across. And then I think certainly from my standpoint was after some time in that organization, it was evident that there was no hope for it moving forward, I guess.
The problem there was resistance to change and fear, like you mentioned previously. What business owners and business leaders need to learn, and this one in particular certainly needs to, is the fact that when momentum gathers pace, don't shut it down. Yes, you might need to guide and assist on that momentum, but in that particular instance, we built up some good momentum. We did some things that were very different. A few of those things I'd stressed to you initially, I wasn't being listened to. You then saw other managers, other team leaders and employees gather pace. Business picked up. I think we went from something like 25 employees up to about 96, 97, something like that. Other opportunities arose to inspire other teams within that organization, and it started to go well. I think the other thing to mention here is that I actually left that organization prior to you joining, to join another organization, to join some other colleagues. And yeah, the grass isn't always greener for sure. But I ended up returning back to that the previous organization, which is when, yeah, we obviously started working together.
So before we bring it sort of up to modern day, from kitchens to marketing to sales to dealing with, interesting leadership, has there been any strange or interesting events that have occurred over those years? Did you, stumble into see something in the office you shouldn't have seen? Was there a client that was a little bit more trouble than they should have been? Any interesting stories that you can do without us putting an explicit tag on this podcast episode?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the personality things, I've had clients where I've walked into a room first time and they've been shouting and swearing. This is not what we expect. This is not what we were sold. And, that wasn't generally down to me or my team doing that. It was what happened previously. And the problem there was process. There wasn't an actual process, and I don't believe there still is today. With the acquisition of the small IT firm that came on, we had some 30, 40 clients where I had to drive all over the country, go and see those. And I remember sitting in my car after the first meeting, and I wasn't sure whether to scream, shout, or even cry, because the level of abuse that I took was phenomenal. And I told myself then, this is just business, it's not personal, and moved on to the next one. In fact, all of those meetings went particularly poorly, and we ended up losing some of those clients. The ones that remained were open to change, but clearly they'd been treated badly previously. So in terms of individual stories, I mean, apart from, the odd flirtation or questionable opportunity or deal where I might have to take somebody for dinner and maybe it has to do more, has occurred once in a lifetime. I won't go into that in great detail, but that was certainly an interesting time. Some people say you should take one for the team. I disagree in that instance. But yeah, I mean, there's been so many similarities and different scenarios, but what I can tell you is that, in that work environment, it was very stressful. There was a lot of shouting, a lot of abuse, people hiding behind their screens. Again, some personalities could stand up to that, but there wasn't many in there. There was a lot of reserved people, engineering, software developers, people that, couldn't really stand up for themselves. Interestingly enough, I was the one always putting my foot down and always trying to drive home my opinion, whether it was heard or not.
That's one of the things that I've always found interesting from a leadership angle, and it resonates over years and years of experience, which is something that I've said repeatedly in interviews. If the company does something great, then the people within that company did something really good. If the company does something bad, it's the fault of the leadership.
Yeah.
And I think in that organization in particular, it was the fault of the people every time. And I think, without going into too much detail, one of the things that I'm very proud to have been able to achieve with our company Velez is that we've pulled across, half a dozen people from that company who were shining stars or who were exceptional at their job. And I think what you tend to find is that a lot of them had the confidence beaten out of them almost, and being able to resurrect that confidence and show them actually where you was told that this was a problem, actually it wasn't. It was more a problem at the top that was simply blamed on those underneath.
The leadership there could only see faces. They didn't really know or understand the individual employees' capabilities and skills. And you've got to question that. You've got to test that, and you've got to be able to let people express themselves. If you don't let people express themselves, then they're going to move on, you know, and they won't tell you that they're going to move on or they're looking, they'll just go. So you've got to very quickly identify, you know, what their love is, their passion. Is that role they're in actually the best role suited to them? Would they like to explore other opportunities?
So for me, after I left, and I've been very fortunate in my career, I took several months out to evaluate what the next stage of my career was going to be. And I formulated this idea of, the third-party maintenance, hardware, business infrastructure. Previously I'd been in software, so hardware was kind of an easy transition play to make. And I looked at the industry, did a lot of analysis and research, flew out to the US and met with some people for conversations around what's missing. And I think it's very interesting that, I kicked this whole thing off, and you'd been working in high pressure environments like kitchens, where you're being shoved, that way you're spinning plates, where you've got a tremendous amount of pressure on. And yet, when Velez was founded, and you don't mind me putting it this way, came back to pick you up, you'd left the IT organization for what reasons?
Honestly, having worked in a couple of, that same organization twice, and let's not forget, I went back because, I thought things had changed. I was told, we will listen to you, we will make you heard, we will promote you, we will give you a team, we'll build a team around you, Dan, making all the right noises. But actually, in the few days that I went to evaluate things again, that seemed to be true. But then again, with constant change of other directors and different ideas, there was no stability, and actually nothing changed. And honestly, just like when I left the hospitality industry, I found myself at a point where, I was older. I didn't feel like I'd succeeded in any way. Although that's not true. There are some stories and employees that actually moved out of that business and went on to be very successful under my leadership. But yeah, I just came to a dead end, and it was more of a case of what next.
Safe to say there might have been some mental stress and effectively mental abuse from the higher ups, and that forced you to leave ultimately.
Yeah, and a lot of business leaders probably won't share or divulge their personal state of mind, or even accept that they might have some challenges. But I had immense stress. I was working late nights, I was starting very early. I found myself drinking excessively because it was the only thing that helped me kind of shrug the shit, if you like, under the carpet from the day previously. And it was only till I left that I realized that actually that company had driven me down a very dark road. And also, I wasn't the only one on that bus. Fortunately, people I'm referring to, including myself, have moved on from that now. But yeah, it was very, very hard, and it took some time. I felt an air of relief and a weight off my shoulders when I'd gone. But once I'd got that out of the way, I found an inner belief where actually the next move needed to be not just going to another company, but trying to get involved in something on my own. But I wasn't sure what at the time.
So you're also a family man.
Yes.
Depending on when this airs, there may be another new arrival. Talk us through that, because that also comes into play quite heavily with career, right? You can't be as successful as you've become without some degree of stability at home, some degree of support, and you're also juggling or spinning plates even in the home life.
Yeah, so my eldest son is actually 17 from a former relationship, and actually that's an interesting one, and something I've learned was that whilst we had our difficulties, one of the main challenges there was how hard I was working, how I wasn't around as much as I probably should have been. Just this burning desire to just work. And I think a lot of people in business can relate to that. Now, starting the Velez journey, I've got Oscar, and Oscar's now 3. Yeah, I wouldn't really advise getting involved in starting up a business with small children. Then I had another one. He's 2, and yes, I've got another one due, which is in the next couple of months.
One of the interesting things, and this is quite polarizing, I suppose, depending on who you talk to, but I remember you and I were on a flight to New York, I want to say, somewhere in the US.
We've done so many.
Yeah, and I think the day we were flying was your son's first birthday.
Correct, yeah. It was a very, very difficult one because no one wants to miss their child's first birthday.
Or any of them, really.
No, or any, really. Certainly made up for that now. But yeah, if I remember correctly, it was the day before we were due to fly back. And, I'd said to my other half, look, I'm going to have to go on this trip, but it might mean that I'm going to have to miss my son's birthday. To which he said, actually, which was remarkable, was he probably won't really remember, and I'm sure you can make up for it when you get back.
So safe to say you've got a solid foundation at home in the home life, somebody that's supporting your endeavors and picking you up when you're down?
Yeah, my other half, she's what I call the secret director, mentor, coach. She's the one that gives me a good kick up the arse when I need it. But she's also, somebody that will listen to anything that I've got going on upstairs in my head.
Yeah,
she'll offer advice, but whether I agree with it or not is a different matter.
No, it's like I have with my other half, I call the CEO of the household.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think sometimes when you're in a high pressure job, when you've got a lot of things going on, even if you can't explain the detail or the intricacies of what's happening, offloading to someone in the home is immensely beneficial.
What I've had to work on, and it's difficult, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is when I'm at home, and it's been particularly difficult during the pandemic for sure, is when you're thinking about things and your mind's going at 100 miles per hour, and all you're thinking about is stuff that's going on at work and things you need to do, and is you can quite easily go into your own bubble, and that bubble basically shuts you down to anything else that's going on around you. So the missus, for example, will say, have you seen this or have you done that? And I'll just nod and say yes, and actually I'm not answering her, I'm actually answering something else in my head. And then she'll say, you didn't hear what I said, did you? And I'll have to say, no, I didn't. Can you tell me again? Which is highly frustrating. But particularly with small children, you've got to be careful with that, because you'll hear people say, oh, I didn't really see my kids growing up. And these are usually business owners that have been working 24/7. And yeah, not seen their kids grow up. So now it's having the ability to turn off the work light, which is difficult, particularly in our industry, because we are running 24/7 as a business. But putting measures in place, putting people in place, and being able to delegate so you're not in that bubble constantly, and actually being able to spend quality time with the kids.